guys, we are back with episode 3, True Crime with Kylie. Please ignore my ghetto background. I tried to steam it, and as I was, making way with it, all of the water started pouring out of the steamer. And it was like up to here. There's not like it was like full. It just started pouring out and it would not stop. So now I have to deal with a new steamer and a very ghetto background. I just wanted to warn you before I get started that this episode is not going to be really like my other ones. There's no way to twist this and make this lighthearted, because this is how dark this episode is. I even had to take breaks while researching for it and making my scripts, because a lot of it just hits close to home. That'll make more sense as I start it, but just a warning, it's a rough one. I also wanted to give specific shout outs to Kayla Carter and Laura Parker for giving me suggestions for last week's case. Laura was actually the one that suggested Luca Magnotta. So thank you both for those suggestions. Keep them coming. I love it. Credit goes out to Marilyn Bardsley from Crime Library. She wrote an amazing article over this. A little hint about who this is that their name was mentioned in last week's episode. Okay, whew. This one's hard for me, y'all. I don't know why I picked it, but I feel like, the victim's stories need to be told. But this is the case of Karla Homolka. Karla Leanne Homolka was born on May 4th, 1970 to Carl. I'm not sure how to say his name because it's spelled like this. And so I'm going to go with Carl. So to Carl and Dorothy Homolka in Port Credit, Ontario, Canada. And she was the oldest of 3 siblings, all of them girls, so very much similar to my family. Being the older sister, obviously her sisters looked up to her. Her sisters, Lori and Tammy, always wanted to follow in her path. Hopefully not anymore, but whenever she graduated high school in 1988, she started working at a veterinary clinic where she was hired as a veterinary assistant. She later moved to another job with a similar position at Martindale Animal Clinic, and this is where, unfortunately, she had access to the drugs that she would use in her later crimes. Jumping ahead to 1987, Karla met a man named Paul Bernardo at a Scarborough cafe. They were both in town for a convention in Toronto. She was 17 and he was 23, so he was 6 years older than her. See, this is why I'm an English teacher and not a math teacher. And as you could see, I used the word man very loosely to describe Paul Bernardo, because in my eyes, he is not a man. He is a monster. Hey, I'm getting worked up. Ooh. I calm myself down. A little bit, like a month and a half after they met, Paul proposed to her on December 24th. The age of majority in Ontario was 18, but the age of consent in Canada at the time was 14. If I got married at 14, would my wedding theme be Pretty Little Liars? Or Secret Life of the American Teenager? Or Jersey Shore? I wouldn't even have my learner's permit. I would still have to... would my mom have to take me to the wedding? And what? Let's take a dive into Paul and Karla's beginning of their wonderful relationship. It's not wonderful at all in any way. She thought it was too good to be true, which it was. She was engaged to a sophisticated, handsome man who was an accountant and had a lot of money, and that they are going to have this extravagant wedding, one so incredible that their family and friends could never forget. Give me a break. Mom and Dad, if you're watching this part, go ahead and just like zoom past it for me because you're not going to want to hear this. Karla was so in love. She told many of her friends that Paul was so unique and wild in bed. Mom and Dad, if you saw this part, just keep going a little bit further. I promise it's almost over. And he made so many outrageous demands that she followed because she wanted to make the man she is so in love with happy. But there was one issue Paul had with Karla. He was upset that Karla was not a virgin. Like, Paul, are you? No, no, I don't want to know, Paul. Don't tell me. From Paul's disgusting point of view, he felt that he had the right to take her little sister Tammy's virginity. He told Karla she needs to figure out a way to give Tammy to him so he can take her virginity without Tammy's knowledge or consent. That's not a gift. That is rape. Karla agreed to all of this and agreed to videotaping it because from their point of view, Karla and Paul's, is that they needed to videotape it because you needed to remember important events. And this is why this case is so hard for me, because being, an older sister to two younger sisters, and I know my older sisters feel the same way about me, oh my God, I just, it physically hurts to knowingly allow someone to hurt a part of my family. Like, I don't have words to describe the hate and the anger I feel towards these people. You do not touch my family. You do not touch my sisters. Ooh, sorry, I'm getting really worked up here, but one last thing on my rant. I decided to do this case because I want the world to know how disgusting these people are. And I want the world to remember these victims, and specifically her little sister, and to know that her little sister deserved nothing that I'm about to talk about. Nothing. So Karla began planning on how she was going to give Tammy to Paul without Tammy knowing. So, as previously stated, Karla worked at a vet clinic, and so they would put animals down to sleep before surgery using a sedative called halothane. And so in Karla's eyes, she was like, okay, yeah, I'll just use this on Tammy. I'll put it on a rag, put it over her face, and then Paul can do what he wants with her. Stephen Williamson wrote a really good book about Karla Homolka and Paul Bernardo, and it's called Invisible Darkness. And so I'm going to read an excerpt from it, and it's kind of like he put himself in Karla's mindset for this. She had really thought this thing with Tammy through. After all, she did not want to kill her sister. She just wanted to knock her out and give Paul her sister for Christmas. They sedated animals before they put them to sleep before surgery, so it should be all right to do it with her little sister. She would have to put the halothane on a cloth and hold it over Tammy's face. But she would make sure she had plenty of air and would check her breathing regularly. A truly organized rape as only a thoughtful sister could plan. Maybe even the most thorough and organized rape ever. December 23rd, 1990. It was the day of Tammy's deflowering, or as they called it, the big day. So, Paul had his new camcorder, and he was recording everyone at the Christmas party, everyone having fun. And meanwhile, while he was doing that, he was filling up Tammy with drinks laced with sedatives. The sedatives didn't take long, and Tammy passed out on the couch. Once everyone went upstairs to sleep for the night, this is when Karla and Paul began to do what they did to her. Okay. Ooh, this is a hard one, y'all. Paul held the camcorder up to Tammy's face, leaving Karla to hold the halothane over Tammy's mouth. so she wouldn't wake up. After Paul was done doing what he wanted to do to Tammy, he got his prize, or whatever he called it, he ordered Karla to make advances on her sister, which she did follow through with. All of a sudden, Tammy began throwing up. And Karla even mentioned that she was upset that Tammy ate so much beforehand, because if she didn't, this wouldn't have happened. But Karla decided to turn Tammy upside down and kind of clear her throat. But because they did this too late and Tammy wasn't able to wake up and realize what is happening, she ended up choking on her own vomit and passing away that night. They decided to just get her dressed real quick. They hid the drugs, they hid the camcorder, and the Homolka family for a very long time thought that Tammy just died from drinking too much and throwing up that way. And if you thought that was bad, it just gets worse from here. With Tammy gone, Paul needed his replacement, and he continuously nagged to Karla that since Tammy's gone, he doesn't have anybody for his sexual pleasure or game or whatever. And Karla was so obsessed with Paul's happiness that she was adamant about finding someone else. And Paul even told her, if you find someone else, she has to be young and she has to be a virgin. Sadly enough, Karla knew exactly who her next target was going to be. It was a young girl named Jane who was family friends with the Homolkas, and she looked very similar to Tammy. And so Jane, growing up with Karla, just idolized her, thought she was a beautiful role model. So Jane was more than happy to go to dinner with Karla and go see Karla and Paul's new house. And at dinner, Karla just plied her with sweet alcoholic drinks. And when you're young and basically have never had alcohol before, it doesn't take much to knock someone out. So unfortunately, they went back to their house and Jane fell asleep on the couch. With Jane asleep on the couch, Karla went and got Paul to surprise him with his new gift. Paul was so elated that there was this young girl there and that the young girl looked a lot like Tammy. So in the beginning, they started videotaping. They undressed her, and Karla did what she did with her, and then it was Paul's turn. And in Paul's turn, he took it very, very to another level. He brutally sodomized her, and throughout this whole thing, throughout Karla doing what she did, and throughout Paul doing what she did, Jane never woke up. After they were through, Paul went to bed, and so Karla was the one that had to deal with everything after. She had to clean up the blood, and she had to put Jane to bed. Luckily, well, not luckily, it's kind of hard to phrase that, but Jane did not die. She woke up very sick and very sore, but she had no idea what happened. She went downstairs and she met Paul, which she thought she was meeting him for the first time, but unfortunately it wasn't, and she had no idea what happened to her at all. Although Paul was so grateful that Karla brought him Jane and amazed about the lengths she would go through to make him happy, he was having second thoughts about marrying her because she was getting older. She already passed her 21st birthday, and she was a far cry from being a virgin. Like, who made you so high and mighty, Paul? Although, Paul had these second crazy thoughts about marrying Karla, he still married her anyways, but he had to have control of every single detail of the wedding. He had to control what Karla was going to wear, what her wedding dress would be. He told her how she was going to wear her hair for the wedding, and he told the minister, you cannot pronounce us husband and wife. You have to pronounce us man and wife. Like, are you kidding me? Even after them getting married, Paul's demands did not simmer. They got worse. And unfortunately, Leslie Mahaffey became the next victim. Leslie Mahaffey was described as a troubled teenager with a strong, independent personality, which people kind of felt it was the root of her problems. And those problems manifested themselves into skipping school, staying out past curfew, having promiscuous sex at a young age, and shoplifting. On June 14th, 1991, Leslie was out with her friends past curfew, and so when she decided to go home, she found that the front door was locked and all the windows were locked, so she wasn't able to get in. So she called one of her friends and said, "Hey, can I spend the night? I'm locked out." And her friend was like, "No, I'm sorry. My mom wouldn't be okay with that." So Leslie was like, "You know what? That's fine. I'm just going to go home and try to sneak in without my parents knowing." But as she was walking back home, she ran into Paul Bernardo, who was out stealing license plates. I'm not sure why, but as soon as she crossed Paul's path, he went and held a knife to her neck and forced her into his car. As Karla was sleeping, Paul started to videotape his young victim, who was blindfolded and naked on the couch. When Karla woke up, she was mad that he had used their new champagne glass earlier. She wasn't mad about the young girl on the couch. She was mad about champagne glasses. So as soon as she got over that, she was more than happy to partake in what was happening. Paul told Karla what to do to Leslie throughout the whole film. And he said, "This has to be perfect because I'm the director and I'm making this film." So as soon as Karla was done, he said, "You're done." Paul went in and started violating her. And as Paul was doing this, Leslie let out a really loud, blood-curdling scream, to which Paul became very angry about. On June 29th, 1991, a couple was out kayaking when they came across a concrete block which they thought had animal flesh on it. They kept going, but the man came back later with a friend to kind of see what it actually was. But as they were looking, not far from the concrete block was a calf and a foot. They immediately called the police, and as the police showed up to the scene, they started, searching around, and unfortunately, not too long after, they found the upper torso of a young girl who was able to be identified by the distinctiveness of her braces as Leslie Mahaffey. Unfortunately, that wasn't the end of Karla and Paul's sick and twisted ways. On April 16th, 1992, Kristen French was abducted from a church parking lot. Karla lured the very pretty girl to her car asking for directions. And so as Kristen was looking at the map with Karla, Paul came behind her with a knife and again forced her into the backseat of their car. Paul and Karla both decided that Kristen had to die because if they let her go, they know that she has seen both of their faces, has seen where they lived, and has seen their dog. And so if they let her go, they would be caught. And so they both decided that she needed to die. Y'all, I can't even imagine what that dog has seen in that house. Oh my God. Kristen was a very smart girl, so she thought the more she did what they were asking her to do, the faster it would be to her release. But unfortunately, in Paul and Karla's sick mind, the more she did, the worse they could do to her. And you'd think that rape was, the worst thing they could do. But no, they did awful things to this poor girl. And it says in the article what they did and said to this girl, but I don't really feel comfortable repeating it again. After I saw it, I had to, take a break from my research because it was a lot to take in. Just know that it was absolutely horrifying. On April 30th, 1992, Kristen's body was found in a ditch. She was naked, and it appeared she had been strangled with a noose. She was not dismembered, and so the police at the time didn't think there was a connection of Kristen's murder to Leslie's murder. Not long after the murder of Kristen French, Karla decided she had enough. But she didn't have enough before, she was murdering and raping these two young girls and her sister. She had enough of Paul whenever he started to physically abuse her. At one point, he gave her 2 black eyes, and after that, she took refuge in her parents' house, and her parents were like, hey, you should call the police. And so she was very reluctant because of what has happened in the past. And so she did end up calling, and they took her to the hospital. But it was kind of the downfall of Paul and Karla from there. In early February, there was an investigation to catch the Scarborough rapist. Many victims gave identification of the suspect, and they were able to composite a sketch together. With this, they kind of waited to release it, but after a while, they're like, okay, we haven't caught him yet. And so they released the sketch to the public. When they released that sketch, lo and behold, many family members and many friends of Paul Bernardo called and said, that looks like him. So the police knew, we have our guy, but they couldn't charge him because they didn't have enough forensic evidence. So they were like, okay, let's move to Karla and see if we can get anything from her. And so the Toronto police was wanting to interview her, but also the Ontario Green Ribbon Task Force wanted to interview her and fingerprint her because they noticed that the watch that Karla was wearing was eerily similar to the Mickey Mouse watch that Kristen French was wearing when she went missing. Several Toronto police interviewed Karla for about 5 hours, and by the types of questions they were asking, she put 2 and 2 together that they were connecting the rapes and the murders together. And so she got very nervous and finally decided to confess to her uncle that Paul was in fact the Scarborough rapist and that he also had killed Kristen and Leslie. Paul was later arrested in conjunction with both the rapes and murders. Not long after his arrest, police executed a search warrant of their house. And what they found was a lot of evidence. They found written descriptions of all the rapes and all the murders. They found books and videos about sexual deviation, pornography, and serial killers. And they also found those videos. And in those videos, before they put them in, they were just expecting to see Paul in them. But as they watched them, they noticed a very willingly and very enthusiastic Karla partaking in all the horrific stuff they did. A week after those videos were found, Karla hired a very, very good attorney. It was kind of like a tit for tat kind of thing because she knew George Walker before because she would kind of give him discounts on, treatments for his dogs. And so it's kind of like, I scratch your back, you scratch mine. And so she was able to hire a very, very well-known attorney and also a plea bargain specialist for the Attorney General. And so what they came up with is that Karla would get 12 years for each victim, and she would be able to be up for parole in 3 years. In exchange for all of that, she would have to tell everything that happened, all her participation. She has to tell the truth, and if she doesn't, that offer's off the table, and to testify against Paul whenever his trial does come. In early March, Karla was admitted to a psychiatric hospital, and during her stay there, she wrote this letter to her family. Dear Mom and Dad and Lori, this is the hardest letter I've ever had to write, and you'll probably all hate me once you read it. I've kept this inside myself for so long, and I just can't lie to you anymore. Both Paul and I are responsible for Tammy's death. Paul was in love with her and wanted to have sex with her. He wanted me to help him. He wanted me to get sleeping pills from work to drug her with. He threatened me and physically and emotionally abused me when I refused. No words I can say can make you understand what he put me through. So stupidly I agreed to do as he said. But something, maybe the combination of drugs and the food she ate that night, caused her to vomit. I tried so hard to save her. I am so sorry, but no words I can say can bring her back. I would gladly give my life for hers. I don't expect you to ever forgive me, for I will never forgive myself. Karla, XOXO. What about Kristen? What about Leslie, Karla? Paul's trial was delayed 2 years after his initial arrest. But despite the delay, and regardless of Karla's innocence or guilt in the matter, it did not kindle the outrage that the jurors felt towards Paul. On September 1st, 1995, he was found guilty of all the rapes and all the murders, and was even tried again for the murder of Tammy. He was sentenced to life in prison, and he is eligible for parole after 25 years. When I saw that, I was like, are you kidding me? Again? We did this with Luca. Why are we doing it with this guy? But then I learned that it is the law in Canada that if you are sentenced to life in prison, you are eligible for parole in 25 years. So my anger's not as bad as it was now that I know it's a law, but I learned something new. After only serving 12 years in prison, Karla was released in 2005 on good behavior. In 2006, she tried to have her name changed and it was denied. And in 2007, she welcomed a little boy. As the years went on, as her kids got older, she tried to be more involved and she tried to volunteer and work at the school they attended. The parents found out and absolutely rioted about it. So they pretty much ran her out of town. And in 2020, it is now reported that she's living by herself without her husband and kids. So sucks to suck, Karla. We did it. That's in my ghetto background. I just want to say thank you so much for sticking with me. I know this one was super hard. I wanted to say that's what she said just then. Hold it in, Kylie. I promise that next week's episode will be more lighthearted, or as lighthearted as it can be for true crime. Thank y'all so much for watching, and see y'all next week with True Crime with Kylie.